Radio 91.3, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas-Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC, Commerce.
Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, so what is the IRS really going to do with the billions of dollars that Congress just gave them? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, the IRS Inflation Reduction Act Strategic Operating Plan, that's a lot to say in one mouthful, details how the IRS will spend the $60 billion appropriated in August of 2022. Today we're going to have Dan Pilla come in and on the radio program and talk a little bit about what is going on. Hey, Dan, how's it going? Perfect timing.
Yeah, it's going well, Bob. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Let's talk a little IRS. The Strategic Operating Plan lays out 5 broad objectives for improving the IRS systems and operations. Talk a little bit about these 5 objectives.
Yeah, these are very, very broad objectives, Bob, just kind of an overall strategy that they've laid out. First thing on the list is they want to improve services to taxpayers, taxpayer assistance and education. Unfortunately, this would be the number one area of concern for me, and it's number one on the list, Bob. But it's got the least amount of appropriation pointed to it. Of the 60.
Sure.
Well, the numbers are based on of the $60 billion, about 90% of that is going to enforcement. And so the second thing on the list is taxpayer assistance issues, specifically developing ways that they can help taxpayers resolve problems when they arise. Number 3 on the list is enforcement. We talked about that. They want to increase enforcement significantly across the board with audits and collection action. And then number 4 on the list is building their technology portfolio, updating computers and software. In particular, they want to become what's called a data-driven agency, where they're using data to make determinations on where to chase delinquent taxpayers and how to enforce the law and that sort of thing. So that would be the next thing on the list. Then we got number 5 here. Number 5 would be building the workforce. They got about 80,000 employees right now in the IRS. They're understaffed compared to historical numbers. The high watermark for IRS employees in the early 90s was about 105,000. So they're down quite a bit, but most of that's attributable. Well, there's a number of reasons for it. But over the next 2 years, by the end of 1 year, by the end of 2024, they expected to lose between 2023 and 2024 another 15 or 20,000 employees. I mean, pretty significant number of employees lost to attrition, to retirement, and so on. So they need to they want to focus on building their workforce. So those are the 5 very, very broad initiatives that they've laid out here for us, Bob.
So many rumors have hit the rumor mill and gone viral over this money that they're going to get. Does the IRS do anything to disprove those rumors?
Well, I guess it depends on the rumor, but yeah, they try to push back against rumors in a number of ways. They issue news releases on a regular basis. They have the Department of Treasury issues policy statements that try to push back on this stuff. Of course, we got the Strategic Operating Plan document itself, which is about 140 or 50 pages long. It's strategic operating plan that they've laid out. So they would point to that to try to diffuse rumors. So there's a lot of ways they do it. The problem is people get something on their head, Bob, and it's really difficult to disabuse them of whatever that might be. And unfortunately, when it comes to the IRS, it's not like they go on the air and debate people. They just don't do that. And so they have to rely on somebody's willingness to go into the data, to go into the literature, call out the data, and make an intelligent decision about really what's going on. And there just aren't that many people out there that do that.
Yeah, and I can't remember the one rumor that's really stuck around for a long time. Still probably is hitting the social media platforms. But the rumor that they're going to be arming real estate. They're going to be arming IRS agents and all this guns and ammo and everything that's going to be purchased, and that seems to still have a little bit of some newsworthiness to it.
Well, yeah, something like that gets legs, and it's really hard to stop it. Now, just like anything else in this world, most of the rumors are grounded in some modicum of fact. And the modicum of fact that was driving that particular rumor is that in the IRS's operating budget, they had a line item for weapons and ammunition. What the truth is, though, Bob, is the IRS has always had a line item for weapons and ammunition in their budget. It's not new that the agency has guns and arms certain elements of tax enforcement officers. There's three types of tax enforcement officers that the typical citizen is potentially going to come into contact with, all right? The first one is what's called a revenue agent. This is a tax auditor. Revenue agents don't carry guns. They don't now. They never have. I suspect they never will. All right? They're the ones that audit your tax returns. Most revenue agents don't even see their their taxpayers' targets. Let's use the word target. Their audit victims, put it that way. They never even see them face to face. And particularly in the last 3 years, where everything has been done through mail and phone conferences and so on because of COVID. So they don't even come into contact with most taxpayers. The second category of IRS employee is a revenue officer. This is a tax collector, right? This is the person that goes out and physically knocks on your door and says, "You owe us money. When can we expect the payment?" Now, most of those guys do not carry guns. I don't know what the IRS's policy is with respect to their carrying guns. I believe they probably have the authority to do so because they do from time to time contact taxpayers. But again, the vast majority of that contact is also over the phone and through the mail. The third category of IRS officer, the one that the citizen of America is least likely to come into contact with, is the special agent. Special agents are criminal investigators. All right, these are the ones that serve search warrants and they serve seizure actions. They're the ones that show up at your door at 7 a.m. and want to talk to you. They read you your rights. These are the cops, right? They're the tax enforcement cops, so to speak. And they do carry guns, and they've always carried guns. And so when you see a line item in the IRS's budget for weapons, it would be for special agents. Now, as I said, special agents are criminal investigators. They're the ones that do criminal investigations into potential tax fraud and evasion. And just to put this into context as to what the likelihood is of the average person running into one of these guys, this year, Bob, there's 162 million individual income tax returns filed. 162 million. The IRS will commence, even with its upgraded money and its new employees and so on. They will commence approximately 5,000, not 5 million, 5,000 criminal investigations. All right, well, criminal inquiries, put it that way. About half of those will turn into criminal investigations, and only about half of those will turn into actual criminal prosecutions. So it is extremely rare that a citizen would ever encounter a special agent involved in a criminal investigation.
We were talking about the strategic operating plan and there being 5 objectives, but it really comes down to if you look at where the dollars are going to, and it's something that you point out in your monthly newsletters, that this is about expanded enforcement and collections.
Yeah, no question about that. About 90% of the money. Let's use the $80 billion figure. Okay, now I know that was cut down to 60, but it was cut down to 60 after the IRS produced the operating plan. So if we use the numbers that are in the operating plan, that's based on the $80 billion. So of the $80 billion, 46 plus billion was pointed directly at enforcement, and another 27 or so billion was pointed at enforcement support. So you take those two numbers, you add them together, that's 90% of the $80 billion focused specifically on enforcement. And this is the point I made earlier. The money that's pointed at taxpayer assistance, problems resolution, taxpayer assistance, taxpayer education, is only about under $4.5 billion. So less than 5% of the money, Bob, is going to taxpayer education and assistance. 90% of the money going to enforcement.
Now, what's interesting is that the White House still claims that nobody under $400,000 will be targeted under the enforcement initiative. Is that true or not?
Oh yeah, that's the statement is true.
I guess I could ask that a different way, right?
They continue to say that nobody earning under $400,000 will be targeted by the enforcement initiatives. And as a matter of fact, the Strategic Operating Plan plainly states that businesses and households earning $400,000 or less will not see audit rates increase relative to historical levels. And that's the phrase that people keep overlooking, is that clause that says relative to historical levels. That's the part that's problematic.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the 7 initiatives the IRS will pursue to achieve its goal of expanded enforcement. The first initiative is centralize the process of selecting compliance cases. What do they mean by centralize the process?
Well, we got 3 different functioning divisions of the IRS that reach out and touch taxpayers, right? Got the audit function, which I talked about, the revenue agents. You got the collection function, where I talked about the revenue officers, and you got the criminal investigation function, which is where the special agents operate. Those are the 3 enforcement arms of the IRS. Everything else is supporting that, basically, but those are the 3. If you'll excuse the expression, the infantry divisions of the IRS, right? They're the ones that contact taxpayers. Though each one of those 3 divisions has its own selection criteria for picking out cases. Collection is going to pick out this kind of a case. Audit's going to pick out that kind of a case. Criminal investigation is going to pick out this kind of a case. What the IRS is talking about is centralizing the selection process under one roof, which is controlled by a vast data-driven system that will analyze data across the entire spectrum of tax filers to make enforcement selections based on that data. So it's not going to be individual case selection anymore by the individual functions. It's going to be this centralized process using their pool of data that's available to do that with. That so when I said earlier they want this data-driven system. They want to have the most massive data of any government agency probably on the planet, and use that data to identify compliance trends and make their selections for enforcement action based on those compliance trends.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. IRS expert Dan Pilla is here with us today to talk a little bit about the IRS Inflation Reduction Act Strategic Operating Plan. You know, one of the things that you wrote about in your newsletter, and let me also mention your website, taxhelponline.com. One of the things that you that you mentioned in your newsletter, you talk about the whistleblower. Where did I go here? Whistleblower program, and you don't hear much about that, but this is a real thing. Talk about how that works.
Yeah, the whistleblower program is more or less what it sounds like, Bob. This is a program that allows citizens to snitch on other citizens that they believe are cheating on their taxes, and to get a reward for their claim, to get a reward for their disclosure based on the amount of money collected by the IRS. So this has been around for a long time. You're right; they don't talk too much about it. They have operated this program for a while, and people can. I don't encourage this, but people can turn in their neighbor, and if the IRS collects as a result of the disclosure of the activity by the whistleblower can get money from the agency.
You just can't make this stuff
bizarre,
up,
doesn't it?
It does. It
Doesn't
does.
that seem bizarre?
It does. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the second initiative is expand the enforcement for large corporations, and this is really, a lot of the you and I talk a lot, and this is the first time I've heard this about corporations coming up. I'm assuming that they are, of course, taking advantage of the tax system as well.
Well, that's what the IRS would have you believe. The Treasury Department would have you believe that. But, the fact of the matter is corporations, Bob, especially large corporations. Well, first of all, when we're talking about large corporations, we're talking about corporations that have more than 500 employees. Well, okay, if you got a corporation that's got more than 500 employees and you're doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, don't you think you have an accounting department, Bob? Don't you think you have people in your business that are professional bookkeepers, professional accountants? You probably have an office of in-house counsel, right? You've got a staff of in-house attorneys, maybe 3 or 4 attorneys that work for the company. And don't you think one of those attorneys is a tax attorney to oversee the accounting function and the bookkeeping function to make sure that these corporations stay compliant with the tax code? So the idea that large corporations are cheating on their taxes is really just bizarre to me, just because they have such a vested interest in staying compliant with the code. But the IRS, Treasury points to the drop in the audit rate. All right, the drop in the audit rate, or the corporation audit rate dropped pretty significantly over the last 10 years. It's about 2% right now. They want to push that to 10%. All right, and so they think that the Treasury thinks that because of the great complexities that are involved in the financial activities of large corporations, that there has to be mistakes in there somewhere. They got to be taking unfair advantage of the system somewhere, and by God, we're going to catch them. So that's what's driving that thinking.
You mentioned large corporations, but you also, their third initiative talks about large partnerships. Talk a little bit about what's going on with that.
Yeah, and we can say the same thing about large partnerships that we say about large corporations. Large partnerships often have thousands of partners, right? Think of a real estate investment trust, Bob, or some of these managed investment things. You know much more about that stuff than I do. A lot of this stuff is done through partnerships where there's literally thousands of partners. And again, you've got these large partnerships that are generating tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and these people have an accounting department. They've got a legal department that is specifically focused on keeping them current. But again, the number of partnerships has increased by about 32% since 2010, according to the IRS. Right, we got about a total of 4.3 million partnerships as of 2020, and these partnerships involve complex tax rules, tax structures, and so on. And so the IRS is focused on going after them because they think there's money to be gained there. Again, I question the wisdom of this because, not because there's not the potential for errors and there's things in these areas, there is, but these people don't systematically cheat on their taxes.
Well, yeah, and you get to the fourth initiative, and that is the real motivation of their goals: expand enforcement for high income and high wealth individuals. I mean, how do you go after a problem that really isn't that much of a problem?
Well, that's exactly what I've been saying all along since this initiative was first laid on the table back in January 2021. This was one of the first things the new Biden administration came out with was this plan to go after taxpayers earning more than $400,000. There was a report that was released by the Treasury, which was dubious at best. I wrote at length about this report that they think that about 35, roughly a third of the tax gap, which they estimate to be about $440 million now, $440 billion. They think a third of that is coming from high-income individuals, and I just think they're plain wrong about that. But the fact of the matter is, that they're going to try to audit their way out of the tax gap, Bob, one taxpayer at a time. And so they just think these high-income individuals are cheating across the board on their tax returns, and they're responsible for a third of the tax gap, and they're going to go after them. And so, this is obviously the highest 1% of income earners, and it's just not that many people. And I just don't know how you audit your way out of a tax gap, one taxpayer at a time.
Well, tell me this: as the listener is tuning in today, listening to us talk about this. What does the average American have to be concerned about with all this going on?
Well, the average American always has to be concerned about paying the taxes they owe. The most common problem that the average American has, Bob, in dealing with the IRS is not necessarily filing the return. Filing compliance is difficult, and if you've got a small business, it gets complicated and so on. But about 60% of the people that file returns use a tax professional to do it. Another 20% that file their own returns are using commercial tax software like TurboTax or something like that to file the returns. So they get through the filing process, and mostly it's okay. The problem is paying the tax. All right, so we've got a federal tax burden now that's probably, I don't know, it's probably in the high 20s in terms of the percentage of total tax burden. You add the state to that, you add the local to that, people are paying 40-45% of their income in taxes at all levels. So it becomes very difficult to pay the tax, and that's where the enforcement comes along, with wage levies, bank levies, property seizures, and so on. So that's what the typical citizen has to deal with. Now, high-income people generally have more complicated situations, although that's not true across the board. You got plenty of high-income people that just simply have a great big W-2 paycheck, right?
Right.
You got CEOs that work for companies that make $2 million a year, $3, $4, $8, $10 million a year, whatever the number is. These professional athletes are making huge amounts of money, but they're W-2 wage earners. They go to work every day, just like Jane and Joe American, except the difference is they make $10 million a year compared to the guy that makes $100,000 a year. So the tax return compliance part of it is not really the problem. It's the tax payment issues that become so difficult for the average citizen.
The last initiative, real quick, is to promote fairness in enforcement activities. How do they go about doing that?
Well, there was a report that came out of the Treasury early this year. It was March of this year, I think, that said that they believe that non-white taxpayers, in particular black taxpayers, were being selected for an audit at a rate of 2 to 4 times, Bob, not percent, times greater than non black taxpayers. All right. So what would drive the IRS's decision to audit black taxpayers at a rate of almost 4 times that of other taxpayers? Well, here's what the problem is. The IRS does not make tax return selection decisions based on race or color or religion or anything like that. They're based, in fact, they don't even have audit selection criteria. That they don't even gather that data, Bob, so they couldn't make the decisions based on that data if they wanted to, because they just don't have the information. They make the decisions based on financial the financial profile of the tax return period. The way the researchers decided that black taxpayers were selected at such a greater rate was based on black-sounding names. All right, so they did the research based on black-sounding names. If the name of the taxpayer sounded like it was probably a black person, they attributed that audit to a black person. So it's a completely arbitrary criterion they used to determine who was being audited and who wasn't. And the IRS responded to this, and this is their response. We're going to make sure that everybody's treated fairly. We want to make sure that nobody's unfairly singled out, that the tax laws apply across the board equally to all taxpayers. This is just throwing lip service at that ridiculous study that the Treasury Department released in, as I said earlier this year.
Once again, Dan's website is taxhelponline.com. A lot of free information and resources at his website, taxhelponline.com. Hey, Dan, great to talk to you. Look forward to talking to you next month.
My pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. It just seems like there's so many moving parts and the complexity of it. I don't know. Well, if you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today.
questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.